Now I would like to show you some popular CSS properties and values. We have already learned some of the values, others will be completely new for us. In this video I would also like to focus on some foundations. I would like to explain to you some concepts that will later help you to understand what is really going on the website. The first thing is font size. We declare it with the notation you can see in the examples, with the dash in the middle. We have learned the units to determine values for this property, such as pixels, percentages, and relative units, such as em and rem. But now I want to show you something else. I would like to show you the use of some form of documentation. Maybe not on the W3 Schools website, which handles extensive documentation, but on other sites where the documentation may be more clear to us. When you enter, for example, font size phrase in a search engine, you will most likely hit the W3 Schools website first, which you can see on your monitor exactly right here. It is a website that aggregates a lot of information related to documenting the way the data works, among others related to CSS properties. But you will also find a lot of information related to HTML and JavaScript, which might be useful for you in the future. It is worth using such documentation when, for example, we do not remember how something works and we would like to check it. There is nothing wrong with it. No one requires you to know everything by heart. The point is to be able to find relevant information quickly and be able to apply it. This page looks like this. You will meet with it more than once when you will look for some information to your work. I'll show you how to use this information in a moment. But I would also like to show you another website with documentation which might be more user-friendly. And I'm talking about the developer Mozilla org. You can see at the bottom of our screen right now, we have a search result related exactly to this website. But if your search engine won't find any search result related to this website, all you need to do is to place developer phrase after your property name, just like this. And probably the first search result you'll get will refer to this website right here, developer.mozilla.org. So let's click this website to check it out, like this. And this is how this website looks like. But let's go back to W3 Schools for now, because I want to show you some information that we will get here. Here we can see example how to use this property. As you can see, we can use pixels, we can use percentages, or something we didn't tell ourselves because it's not so popular nowadays, but we can use a word as a value for our font size. You can see large in this example. Let's scroll a little bit down. And here we can get some interesting information. For example, default value. This is default value set in the official CSS specification. As you can see, the value for this property is medium. Medium will be computed by the browser to 16 pixels. As I said, we can use some words like medium, large, or small as a value for our websites because those values exist since the beginning of CSS, but we usually don't use them now. The next useful information we can get is if this property is inherited, and we can see it is. So if we set a font size of our element to, for example, 20 pixels, every element inside this element will inherit this value if we won't put another custom value to this specific element. You know this by now in the example of the HTML element, which has its medium font size, which is 16 pixels computed by the browser, which is inherited by default by every element on our website. Here's the information if this property is animatable, so if you can use some sort of animation on it, but that's the case of some advanced CSS. Here we can see in which version of CSS this property was created. We can see this is from CSS1, so from the very beginning. And we also have useful information for you in the future, which is JavaScript syntax. So how to type this property in JavaScript. I strongly recommend you to learn JavaScript in the future because it will improve tremendously your work as a web developer. Here we can also see the browser support, from which version of every modern browser this property is supported. Let's scroll down a little bit. Here we can see some values we can use for this property. As I said, we can use some recognizable words. This is the value you can use. This is the description of it. So you can read what this actually do. As I said, we don't use words as a value for a font size property now, but as you can see, you can use it with no problem. Usually we use percentages, M or rem units, or just pixels. Now let's go to Developer Mozilla page to check what you can find on this one. Here you can see some examples of usage. You can see some different units, percentages, pixels, recognizable words, the M unit. You can read about the syntax right here. Let's scroll a little bit down. You can read about the values for this property. You can get extensive examples for it. Very nice description for every unit we can use. And many very useful things. You can add these websites to your bookmarks or just remember that they exist and you can use them whenever you need them. Now I've created a blank HTML document and I open it with the live server. Now I want to show you something. Let's open our DevTools. And the first thing you can see is that even though I didn't create an HTML structure in my document, the browser created it automatically. We can see the HTML tag. Inside we have our head tag and our body tag. So that's how modern browsers work. They create the simple HTML structure even if it's a blank HTML document. Now let's go to our Styles tab. Let's select our HTML tag like this. Let's go to the Computed tab. Let's go down and let's click this option, Show All. This way we will get all the styles set for the browser for this element. Let me show you this. Let's click it. And here we will get every initial property set for this element by official CSS specification, as well as the browser default styles set by the browser. We can see every property is set for every element, even if we don't place these properties by ourselves. So even if you think there's no property referred to some element, it has its properties set automatically, even though if we don't see it. There's always initial property set in official CSS specification, and there might be default browser styles set by the browser. Some of them will be inherited to other elements from the main HTML element. Some of them won't. Let's check for the font size property, which should be right here. And you can see it's not medium anymore because it's computed to 16 pixels, just as I said. Now let's check our body like this. Let's check its font size. It should be right here. And as we can see, it's also 16 pixels. And that's just because it was inherited from its parent element, which is the HTML tag. So this is how it works. Another property is the background color. We can specify it by a defined name, hexadecimal number, or RGB function. So in the same way as the color of the font. If we place the background color phrase in the search engine, we will most likely get the same search results as with other CSS properties. So here we can see W3 Schools reference page. And at the bottom, the same result in the developer Mozilla org site. Let's click on W3 Schools documentation, and we can read all about this property as well. Here we have an example of using it. Here we can read the definition and usage. Here we have some important information where we can see the default value for the background color for every HTML element is transparent. And that's quite interesting because the white color on the blank website you can see is not the part of the HTML. Every HTML element with the HTML main element itself is transparent. The white color of the blank page is the part of the browser. It's just how the browser works because the font color is usually set by the browsers to black. The background color of all elements is transparent, so it will be clearly visible on the white background, which is set by the browser and not by the HTML or CSS specification. Here we can also see that this property is not inherited. You can see it right here. So if we set some background to our main HTML element, it won't be inherited by other elements inside it. Yes, they will visually have the same background, but that's just because all the other elements are still transparent. So at the bottom of those layers is the background for the main HTML element we set manually. Here we can also see that this property is animatable, so we can use some kind of animation on it. Here we can see the version of CSS where this property was created, and it was CSS1. Here we have a JavaScript syntax for it, the browser support, which you can see it's basically supported from the beginning of the internet because Internet Explorer is the oldest web browser, so everything below the 5th version of Internet Explorer is basically an ancient history. The beginning of Chrome and Firefox is a good starting point from a modern internet. So as you can see, it's also supported from the first version of those two browsers. Here we can read about the syntax of it. Here we can check some values for it and see some more examples of it. Now let's go back to our Visual Studio Code. Let's create a basic HTML structure in our document, like this. Let's create a div tag in our body tag. Let's give it some lorem inside it. Let's save it. Let's open our DevTools. Let's check our HTML document, like this. Let's go to Computed tab. And let's see the default background color for our HTML element. We'll get it right here. Background color. And we can see it's specified with the RGBA function, where we have 3 0 values for all the basic colors. So it should be basically black. But as we can see, we have the 4th value, which is also 0, which in the RGBA function make our element completely transparent. Now let's check our div tag, which we can see right here. And it's the same situation. This is the background color of our div, and you can see it's also transparent. Exactly like this. As I said, by default, all the elements are transparent, and the white color you can see on the blank website, it's not the part of the HTML, but it's displayed by the browser for the clarity. The font color is by default black, and it's clear for the user that it appears on the white background, although all the HTML elements are actually transparent. Of course, we can change the background of any element however we want. So let's do so. Let's go to our head tag. Let's create a style tag. Let's create a rule for our div tag. Let's set its background color. And here's a tip for you. You can use a shortcut BGC and you can choose the background color like this. Let's give it some gray color like DDD, for example. Let's save it. And you can see it already on your monitor right now. Let's check this element in our DevTools. Let's go to the Styles tab. We can see the background color, which we set in our index.html file. Let's go to the Computed tab. Let's go down. We can see our background color right here. It's of course computed to the RGB function, which you can see exactly right here. So our own style replaced the default style, because our own styles are always more important than the initial styles or the default browser styles. The color property is responsible for the font color. We declare it in the same way as the background color. We can use a defined name, a hexadecimal number, or the RGB function, or the RGBA function if we want our font to be somehow transparent and blend with the background. We are again at the W3 Schools website, this time referring to the CSS colors. Here you can check, for example, color names supported by all browsers. Here we have a nice representation of them, where we can see the keyword, which is the name of a certain color, its hex number, and the actual color you will get using this value to the color or background color property. You can check them out. Some of them are really pretty nice. Let's go down. As you can see, there are many of them. 140 recognizable color names. So these names can really come in handy sometime. Now we are on CSS color property page of W3 Schools website, where we can check the examples of using the color property and some interesting information, for example. What is actually interesting is that the default value for the color property is actually not specified in the official CSS documentation. But as we know, all the browsers set the default value for the color property to black. And that's why the background of the browser is white. So that even if we don't use any our own CSS styles to it, the background will be always white and the font will be always black, so it will be readable for the user. We can see this property is actually inherited. Here we can also see this property is animatable. It's since the version of CSS 1, so basically from the beginning. Here we have the JavaScript syntax, which can be useful for you in the future, and the browser support, where we can see it's basically from the beginning of the internet. Now let's go back to our Visual Studio Code. Now I want to show you some inheritance in practice. I changed my project a little bit. I deleted everything from our style tag, and in our body tag, I created a section in which we have a div tag, in which we have a p tag with some text in it. We have also another p tag directly in the body without any additional nesting. So the second p tag is a brother to our section, in which the first p tag is in. Now let's go to our style tag. Let's create a rule for our HTML element. And let's set its color to red, for example. Let's save it. And you can see the effect on your monitor right now. As we know, the color property is inherited, so all the elements inside our main HTML element will inherit the red color. Let's open our DevTools. Let's mark our body tag like this. Let's go to Computed. Let's go to the color property, which we can see right here. We can see it's red. If we click on it, we see the information that this property is inherited from the HTML element. So the body tag inherited from the HTML tag. then the section inherited from the body, the div inherited from the section, and the p tag should inherit it from our div tag. And even now, if you click on this arrow on the left side, like this, you'll go to the Styles tab, where you can directly see that the color is inherited from HTML right here. That's exactly how it works. Now let's go to our style tag once again. Let's create a rule for our section. Let's set its color to blue. Let's save our file. And we can see that our first paragraph has now a blue color because the p tag inherited from the div tag, which inherited from the section. Now section has its own blue color, so it doesn't inherit the red color from the HTML main element. Now let's create another rule now for our div tag, and let's set its color to green. Let's save it. How do you think? What's gonna happen? Of course, our first paragraph has the green color because our p tag right here inherited this color directly from our div, which color is specified exactly right here. So you can see our second paragraph, which is directly in the body tag, which you can see right here, is still being red because it still inherits the color from the HTML. Now I will explain to you what this whole inheritance is. Our element always checks what its parent has, and it always inherits the properties directly from its parent. To show you this, let's comment the div rule and the section rule. Let's comment it. Now our p tag will check if the div has its own specified color. If not, it will check if the section has its color. If not, it will check the body. If the body still doesn't have its set color, it will refer to the main HTML element. And we will see it when we save our file right now. Just like this. Now let's uncomment these. Let's save our file. If we would comment just the div tag, like this, our p would stop searching the color at the section tag because the section now has the blue color. So it will inherit its color from the section, which we can see right here. But if our div tag, which is a parent of our p tag, has its own color set by the developer, this color will be inherited directly from the parent element. As I said, the second paragraph is red the whole time because it searches the color from its parent, which is the body. And since the body hasn't got its own color, it searches above to the HTML element. And as you can see, this element is red. But if we would add a rule for our body tag, for example, sandy brown, let's save our file. This color would change directly to its parent element, which is the body tag. So that's how the inheritance works. We can see it in DevTools as well. If we check our second p tag, go to the styles overlap, scroll a little bit down, we can see its color is sandy brown and it's inherited from the body tag. Another property is margin. You will often see the margin property in this notation, where the value will consist of several positions separated by a space. It could be 1, 2, 3, or 4 positions. These values determine the directions against which this margin is drawn, and these directions are always going clockwise. The first value in the margin property always means 12 o'clock, which is margin top. The second value applies to the 3 o'clock, which is margin right. The third value is 6 o'clock, so it's margin bottom. And the last value is 9 o'clock, which is margin left. As you can see on this slide, we can also specify the margin only for one direction. We don't have to give all directions. To do so, we specify the direction in the property name after dash. We can also express the margin in units other than pixels. For example, using percentages or viewport units. The margin can also be negative, as you can see in the last example. Let's take a look at the margin property on the developer Mozilla side. This is the page you will get searching for the margin property. Here we can see the examples of use of this property. Here we have different units, pixels, as you can see right here, percentages, or the M unit. And what I'm about to show you is that the margin property in fact has these 4 properties inside it, which is margin bottom, margin left, margin right, and margin top. But I'm going to show you this in the code and in the DevTools. Here we can read about the syntax of it, some values we can use. We have a nice description, but let's focus on the formal definition of it. What we are interested in is this initial value. So we have this initial value for all the HTML elements created on our website. And you can see it's 0 for margin bottom, left, right, and top. But as you may know, the body tag in the browser has by default the margin of 8 pixels. And that's the difference between the initial value and the default browser styles. That 8 pixels, which you can see by default in the browser, is not specified in the official CSS specification, but it's considered by all modern browsers to have it by default, just for the clarity to be user-friendly. So the initial value for all HTML elements for the margin property is 0, specified in the official documentation, but then the browser set its own default style, which you can see as the margin of 8 pixels at the body tag. We can see that this property is not inherited. So if we will use some kind of a margin for our div, for example, the elements inside that div won't inherit this margin. Now let's go back to our Visual Studio Code. I've prepared another version of our project, which you can see on your screen right now. All I have here are some headings and a p tag in our body tag. As you can see, we didn't add any styles inside our document, so we didn't specify any margins, but you can see that the elements on our website are by default separated from each other. So let's open our DevTools. Let's put this a little down. And if you pick the selecting tool and hover on some element, you can see the margins of the elements as the orange area. And it's applied basically to every our element. On those headings, on a p tag, where we can see margin top and margin bottom. And as I said before, even on our body tag, where we can see our 8 pixel margin set by the browser as the orange area at the edges of our browser window. Now, if we select our body tag right here and go to the styles overlap, we will see the browser styles. We can see it right here. It's the user agent style sheet. So the styles set by the browser. And here we can see our margin property, which is set to 8 pixels. And what I was saying earlier is that the margin property, in fact, contains 4 properties. And you can look on them clicking this little triangle right here. Let's do it. And that's what you can see. We have our margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left. All these properties set to 8 pixels. So in the short version, all we have to do is to place margin property and set the value, one value, to all directions. We can see it also in the computed tab. When we scroll down, here we can see we don't have the short version of this property because it has to be computed to each direction. So we have these 4 values for margin bottom, left, right, and margin top. But we as the developers usually want to reset those default margins, and we do it more or less like this. Let's go to our styles tag. Let's try to make it this way. Let's create a rule for our HTML. And let's try to set margin to 0 to get rid of those margins. Let's save our file. And we can see that nothing actually happened. And that's because margin property is not inherited. So if we want to reset all the margins for all our elements in our document, we have to use the asterisk symbol. Asterisk means take all the elements on our website, all the elements separately, and give them this value to the margin property. Let's see if it works. Let's save our file. And you can see the difference already on your screen. Now this website is less readable, but it will be easier for us to set the margins how we want them to be. Because now if we comment it, the browser styles are primarily to make a website easier to read if its creator only put the text on it, not caring about the visual value of the website. So if you just place plain HTML, not caring about the CSS styles, the browser will take care for your website to look more or less like a book, with all those margins, font sizes, bolding the fonts, etc., etc. But we, as the developers, want to style our websites by our own. Now let's check, for example, our p tag. Even though you can see already right here that we don't see those margins, those orange areas. If we go to the styles tab, we can see that for our p tag, its margin is set to 0, like this. And it comes from the rule, from our reset, where we use the asterisk symbol. And it's the same for all our elements. For example, h1 tag, which you can see right here, which is exactly the same. And it's the same situation in the computed tab, where we can see all those margins set to 0 pixels. So margin is responsible for separating the elements from each other on our website. Now, since we did a reset of our margins, we can add our own margins if we want. For example, for h1 tag, let's set margin top. MT is the shortcut. If you'll type MT on your keyboard and press enter, you'll get the ready property. Now all you have to do is to place your value. Let it be 120 pixels. Now let's place a margin bottom. MB is the shortcut. It's the same situation. All you have to type is MB, then press enter. Then all you have to do is place the value. Let it be 50 pixels. Let's save our file. And we can see the effect already on our website. The top orange area is our margin top, and the bottom orange area is our margin bottom. What you have to remember is that the margin is outside our element. It is an additional space between our elements, and this space can be set on either side of the element. We can use other units as well. Let's set our margin top to 50 VH. which is the viewport height, which is the height of our browser window. Let's save it. Here you can see the difference. Now our margin top is exactly 50% of the browser window. Let's close this DevTools for now. Now you can see our browser window is bigger, so our margin top is bigger as well, because viewport units are responsive. But I want to show you now what we usually do with the content on our website. We can wrap everything we have in our body tag in a, for example, div with the class wrapper, like this. So we place everything on our website in this one div. And now we can style it. Let's delete this row for our H1. Let's save our file. So we have no margins on our website now. But let's refer to our wrapper class. And let's set its margin to, for example, 20 pixels at the top, 30 pixels at the right, 20 pixels at the bottom, and 30 pixels at the left. Let's save our file. And in this way, we separated the whole content of our website from the edges of the browser window. You'll see it even better if we place a background color to our div with the DDD color. Let's save it. And this is exactly how it looks. If we will comment this margin, our div with the class of wrapper starts from the edges of the browser window. And we can use this margin to distance it a little bit. And here you can see that the margin is not part of the element. It's outside and it distances it from the other elements on our website. Or like in this case, from the edges of the browser window. Now you may ask yourself why the other elements inside our div with the class of wrapper has this gray background, since the background color is not inherited. And it's the same situation as with this white color at the bottom of the browser. Those elements inside our div with the class of wrapper do not have this gray background. Their background is transparent, so at the bottom of these all elements, we can see the background of our div, which is gray. So this is how it works. One thing I wanted to show you with the margin is that, as I was telling you, the margin property can get 4 values, and it's always clockwise, which is margin top, margin right, margin left, and margin bottom. But if we will place only 2 of them, then the first one refers to the margin top and the bottom, and the second refers to the margin left and margin right. Let's save the file. And you see no difference because deleted values were exactly the same as those. So if we want equal values at the top and the bottom, and different but still equal to each other at the left and the right, we can only use 2 values. So this would be, for example, 10 pixels from the top and the bottom, and 50 pixels from the left and the right. Let's save it. This is the effect. And if we use only 1 value, it will mean that we will get the same value from each side of the element. Let it be, for example, 40 pixels, 40, not 400. Let's save our file. And we will get 40 pixels on the each side of our element. Now let's go to some further properties.